There is a particular kind of dismissal that does not arrive as an insult. It arrives as concern. It wears the face of practicality, of love even, and it says things like you should have a backup plan and we just worry about you and it would be nice to have something stable. And because it comes from people who genuinely believe they are helping, it is very difficult to name accurately for a long time. You spend years receiving it as care. You spend years adjusting yourself to it, softening your answers, understating your income, describing your work in smaller words than it deserves so that the concern does not escalate into argument. You learn which phrases produce the least friction. You learn to say it's going okay instead of I billed $14,000 last month, because the second sentence opens a conversation you do not have the energy for on a Sunday evening. You make yourself smaller, and you call it keeping the peace, and eventually you stop noticing that you are doing it because it has become as automatic as breathing. And then one Thursday in March a phone rings at 7:53 in the morning, and the concern evaporates completely, and what is underneath it is finally visible. My name is Clara Hensley. I am 33 years old. I am a freelance UX designer living in Portland, Oregon, and for 6 consecutive years my family called what I do a hobby, a phase, a little project, a thing I would eventually grow out of, right up until the morning my brother needed $23,000 by Friday, and it became, without any acknowledged transition, a resource. This is what happened before that morning, and what I did after. My father, Gerald Hensley, is 62 years old. He spent 31 years as an operations manager at a regional trucking company in Medford and retired in 2021 with a clear and settled understanding of what work looked like. You drove to a building, you stayed for 8 hours, someone deposited money into your account every 2 weeks, and the arrangement was legible to anyone who asked about it at a dinner table or a hardware store or a neighbor's backyard in July. He is not an unkind man. He is a man whose entire framework for stability was built around the visible and the verifiable, and my work, done from a spare bedroom on a laptop, invoiced to clients he had never met, paid in amounts that varied month to month depending on project scope and delivery schedules, registered to him as fundamentally precarious regardless of what my bank statements showed. I understood this about him early. I spent 6 years trying to translate what I did into language he could receive. I brought up client names. I described project scopes in concrete terms. I mentioned once a number, $11,200 in a single month, and watched his face do the thing it does when information conflicts with a belief he has held for a long time, and he does not know yet whether to revise the belief or reframe the information. He reframed the information. He said that sounded like a good month and asked if I had thought about putting more into savings in case it slowed down. I said I had a savings account. He said that was smart. We moved on. My mother, Diane Hensley, is 59. She ran a small Etsy shop selling handmade ceramic pieces for several years and understood, in theory, that creative work had value. She made things with her hands and sold them to strangers online and understood the particular satisfaction of that exchange. In practice, she deferred to my father's framing on most things financial, including this one. She used the phrase your little projects without apparent awareness that it was diminishing. She meant it affectionately, with a fond, slightly distracted tone you might use to describe a child's art class or a neighbor's garden. She said it at Sunday dinners, on phone calls, in conversations with relatives who asked what Clara was up to these days. She said it so consistently, and for so long that I think she stopped hearing herself say it sometime around 2020. The same way you stop hearing a clock tick after the first few days in a new room. My brother Marcus is 36. He runs an HVAC company called Hensley Climate Solutions out of Grants Pass. Or, he did until the spring of this year when the company encountered the specific kind of cash flow problem that happens when a small business wins more contracts than its working capital can actually service. He has 2 full-time employees, a cargo van with his name on the side in lettering I chose and a font I specified, and a color I matched to a hex code on a Tuesday evening in October 2021, and the particular confidence of a man who has always been the son my father understood intuitively and completely. Marcus played baseball through high school. He drove to a job site every morning in a truck. His work had a physical product, ducts and thermostats and condensers and air handlers installed in buildings you could visit and touch, and my father could describe it to people at the hardware store in a single sentence without pausing to define his terms. This is not a small thing in a family like mine. I am not saying my father loved Marcus more. I am saying my father could see Marcus clearly in a way he never fully managed with me, and that difference accumulated over 33 years into something neither of us ever sat down to examine directly. Before I tell you about March 7th, I need to tell you about the 6 years before it. Not as a complaint. I have spent enough time in sessions with my therapist Ruth Adler to understand the difference between accounting for what happened and building a case against people I still love, but because the invoice I sent at 7:09 p.m. on a Thursday evening does not make sense without the work that preceded it. The invoice is a document. Documents require context to be read correctly. But first, where are you right now? What does your day look like from where you're sitting? Is it morning, with the light still deciding what it wants to be? Or has the afternoon settled into that particular horizontal gold that means the working part of the day is almost over? I ask because what I am about to tell you took 6 years to build, and I want you to have your feet on solid ground when it arrives. In April of 2019, my parents decided to build a small online presence for the home inspection business my father had started after retirement, Hensley Property Services, operating out of Medford, serving Jackson and Josephine counties. They needed a website. My mother mentioned this on a Sunday call, not as a formal request, but as a problem spoken aloud in the vicinity of someone who worked on computers, in the expectation that proximity would produce a solution. I was 27. I had been freelancing for 2 years. I had built 14 client websites at that point, the least expensive of which I had billed at $2,800, and the most recent of which, a service business in Bend, I had invoiced at $4,100. I said I would take a look at what they needed. What they needed, once I assessed it, was a 5-page site with a services overview, a coverage area map, a contact form, a booking inquiry calendar, and a local SEO foundation that would help them appear in search results when someone in Medford typed home inspector near me. Standard work. Work I had done variations of a dozen times. I built it over 6 weeks in May and June of 2019, designing in Figma, developing in a CMS my mother could update herself, writing copy that described my father's 31 years of operations experience in language that would resonate with a homebuyer who had never met him. I drove to Medford on a Saturday in late June to sit with my mother at the kitchen table and walk her through the back end, how to update the service descriptions, how to add a new coverage area, how to check the contact form submissions. We sat together for 2 hours. She took notes in a spiral notebook she bought specifically for the occasion. My father came through the kitchen at one point, looked at the screen, said it looked very clean and professional, poured himself a glass of water, and went back to the living room. I drove back to Portland that evening. I billed nothing. I told myself it was a gift. The website ranked on the first page of local search results for Home Inspector Medford, Oregon by September of that year. My father's phone started ringing with new inquiries. He mentioned this on a Sunday call in October, attributing it to word of mouth and his reputation in the community. I did not correct him. In the fall of 2021, Marcus launched Hensley Climate Solutions. He texted me in September with what I can only describe as a shopping list: logo, van decals, invoice templates, business card, service flyer. No question mark anywhere in the message. Just the items, the way you text someone a grocery list when you expect them to be going to the store. I looked at the text for a long time before I responded. A logo, at my standard rate, started at $1,800 for a small business, and that was for a basic mark without an extended identity system. What Marcus was describing, a complete visual identity with applications across vehicles, print, and administrative documents, I would have scoped at $4,200 to $4,800 for client, depending on the number of revision rounds and the complexity of the final deliverables. I knew this. I sat with my phone and I knew this, and I typed back, "Send me more details about the business and what you're going for visually." He sent a voice memo, 9 minutes long. He talked about wanting something clean and professional, blue and gray maybe, something that looked established even though the business was new. He said his wife liked the look of a company called Arctic Air out of Bend. I looked up Arctic Air. I understood what he meant. I spent 3 weeks in October on the project, evenings and 1 full Saturday, working around 2 paying client deadlines. I designed 4 logo concepts. He chose the second one with minor modifications. I developed the full identity from there, primary and secondary color palette, typography system, logo variations for different applications, van decal layout files sized for the specific dimensions of his cargo van, a Canva invoice template his office manager could use without design software, a business card front and back, a one-page service flyer in 2 versions, residential and commercial. I packaged everything in an organized folder with a style guide PDF explaining how to use each element correctly. I sent him the files on a Thursday morning in late October. He had the van decals applied at a print shop in Grants Pass that Friday and texted me a photo of the finished van in a parking lot, afternoon light catching the blue lettering along the side. He sent a thumbs up emoji. He did not mention payment. I did not send an invoice. The van looked good. I told him so. My mother's Etsy shop had been running since 2018 but had never fully found its footing. In early 2022, she mentioned on a Sunday call that sales had been slow, 3 or 4 pieces a month at most, and that she wasn't sure the listings were written in a way that helped people find the shop. She said her friend Linda's daughter had looked at it and thought the descriptions might be the issue. She said it in the offhand way she says most things, not quite a request, just information released into the air between us. I asked her to send me the shop link that evening. I spent 2 full weekends in February going through it systematically, all 23 active listings. I rewrote every product title for search visibility, rewrote every description for both SEO and conversion, restructured the shop sections, redesigned the banner and profile image in Canva, and wrote a photography direction document she could use to reshoot the pieces herself with her phone. The document was 4 pages. It covered background surfaces, lighting angles, how to style each category of piece, and how to photograph texture in ceramics without losing detail in the shadows. By December of 2022, her shop had generated $4,200 in sales, a year that was, by her account, the best the shop had ever had. She mentioned this at Christmas dinner with visible pride. She attributed it to her ceramics finally finding the right audience, to people discovering handmade things during a period when everyone was thinking more carefully about what they bought. She was warm and happy describing it. I listened and I smiled and I said that was wonderful, and I passed the potatoes. I filed my parents' LLC annual report in March of 2022 after my mother called me on a Tuesday evening in mild panic to say she had received a notice from the Oregon Secretary of State's office about a missed deadline. I logged into the state portal that same evening, completed the filing, paid the $100 annual fee from my own checking account, and emailed her the confirmation receipt at 9:47 p.m. She called me the next morning to say thank you, and that she didn't know what they would do without me. I said it was no trouble. I filed it again in February of 2023 when the same thing happened. Different Tuesday. Same mild panic. Same portal. Same $100. Same thank you call. My father, when it came up on the following Sunday call, said something about how lucky they were that Clara was so good with computers. Good with computers. 6 years. A website that ranked organically and drove new business, my father attributed to his reputation. A brand identity on a van that drove around Grants Pass every day with lettering I chose. 23 product listings that generated $4,200 in sales my mother attributed to her ceramics finding their audience. 2 state filings that kept the LLC in good standing, the fees paid from my account, the confirmations forwarded and promptly forgotten. 6 years of Sunday calls in which my father asked how the projects were going, and I said fine, and chose words deliberately small enough not to start the conversation about getting something stable. I kept the 2023 number $147,000 to myself the way you keep things that would require more explanation than the moment can hold. I am telling you that number now. I want it on the record. The Thursday in March began like a normal Thursday. I was at my desk by 7:30 a.m. Coffee made, project management tool open. The week laid out in front of me with the clean, satisfying structure of a schedule I had built myself and that no one could alter without my agreement. I had a wireframe set due by end of day for a SaaS company in Seattle, navigation redesign, mid-fidelity, for key user flows. I had a feedback round to complete on a mobile onboarding sequence for a fintech client in Austin. I had a check-in call with Deb Rao at Fieldwork scheduled for Friday morning. It was an ordinary morning in an ordinary week, and I was inside it completely, 40 minutes into the wireframe, when my phone rang at 7:53. Marcus. I looked at the screen for 2 rings. A 7:53 a.m. call on a Thursday was not a pattern we had. I answered. He said he needed to talk to me about something. His voice had the specific quality it gets when he is managing how he sounds, the controlled, slightly flattened effect of a man who has rehearsed and asked enough times that the words come out smooth, but the effort of the smoothness is audible underneath. He said the business had hit a cash flow issue. He said he had won 3 large contracts in January, residential HVAC replacements, all substantial jobs, and that all 3 were billing on net, 60 terms, meaning the client payments were not due until late March. He said payroll was due Friday. He said the materials invoice for the largest of the 3 jobs was also due this week, from a supplier in Medford who had already extended terms once and was not in a position to do it again. He said he had spoken to his bank about a short-term line of credit on Monday, and they had declined because his business credit history was too thin. The company was only 3 years old. He said he needed $23,000. He went quiet for 3 seconds after he finished. I noticed the silence precisely, the way I notice most things, with the part of my attention that has been trained over years of client work to read what is not being said as carefully as what is. It was not the silence of a man who had just said something difficult and was waiting to see how it landed. It was the silence of a man who had already worked through the available options, arrived at this one, and was now waiting for the response he had anticipated when he made the call. I said, "What are the 3 contracts worth combined?" He said, "About $94,000. I said, "When exactly does the money come in?" He said the first payment was due March 28th, the second April 4th, the third April 11th at the latest. I said I would think about it and call him back. I set the phone down on my desk at 8:11 a.m. and looked at the wireframe on my screen for a long moment without seeing it. The Seattle client needed the navigation flows by 5 p.m. I had 4 hours of focused work between me and that deadline. I made a deliberate decision to put the call in a separate compartment of my attention and work until noon because I have learned, through years of working alone without the structure of an office to regulate the rhythm of a day, that decisions made in the first hour after an unexpected request are almost never the right ones. The request needs time to settle before you can see its actual shape. I worked until noon. I finished the wireframe at 11:47 a.m., reviewed it once, made 2 small adjustments to the navigation hierarchy on the account settings flow, and sent it to the Seattle client at 12:03 p.m. I made a sandwich. I sat at my kitchen table and ate it and looked out the window at the street below, at the particular gray-green of a Portland March afternoon, and I let myself think about the call properly for the first time. $23,000 was not a sum that would break me. That was the first honest thing I admitted to myself. My savings account, as of the previous Friday, held significantly more than that, accumulated over years of billing rates my family did not know I charged and saving percentages my family did not know I kept. I could write the transfer and Marcus's employees would be paid on Friday and the materials supplier in Medford would be satisfied, and by mid-April, when the 3 contracts paid out, I would have the money back. That was one version of the picture. The other version was the one I had been looking at since 7:53 a.m. and could not stop seeing. The phone call that had gone to me rather than to a bank or a business lender or a friend with capital. The smoothed-out voice. The 3-second silence after the ask. And underneath all of it, 6 years of your little projects and you should get something stable and it's not really real money, is it? 6 years of a family's settled opinion about what I did and what it was worth. An opinion that had been perfectly consistent and perfectly convenient right up until a Thursday morning when it became inconvenient to maintain. My parents called at 4:47 p.m. Not Marcus, my parents, which told me that Marcus had made additional calls in the hours between 8:11 a.m. and 4:47 p.m., which told me that the call to me on Thursday morning had not been the first option. It had been the option reached after other avenues had been considered and declined or exhausted, and then my name had come up, and the logic of the situation, she has savings, she has no dependents, she would want to help, had been assembled by people other than me and delivered as a conclusion. My father's voice on the call was the voice he uses when he has decided something is reasonable and is now explaining it to someone who has not yet arrived at the same conclusion. He said Marcus was in a difficult spot. He said the contracts were real and the money was coming, and it was only a matter of weeks. He said it would just be a bridge. He used that word specifically, bridge, as though naming the temporary nature of the arrangement would dissolve any possible objection to it. He said Clara had savings. He said this as a statement of established fact, which meant Marcus had told him the substance of our conversation, which meant the 8:11 a.m. to 4:47 p.m. window had involved some version of a family conference I was not invited to attend. He said, "You have savings. Your brother has people depending on him. This isn't the time to make a point about money." I want to be careful here, the way I am always careful when I describe my father, because he is not a villain and I do not want to write him as one. He said what he said because the internal logic of it was consistent with everything he had always believed about how resources should move in a family, toward need, away from surplus, without the friction of formality or the coldness of calculation. He did not hear the sentence he had actually said. He did not hear "your brother has people depending on him" as its implicit contrast, and "you do not," which is what it was. He was not making a point. He was stating what seemed to him like obvious, compassionate arithmetic. He genuinely could not see the problem with it. That is, in its own way, the most accurate and the most difficult thing I can say about my father. My mother said in the background, "We just think it would mean a lot." I said I would think about it. I ended the call at 6:31 p.m. Something inside me went completely quiet. Not the quiet of someone deciding to comply, but the quiet of someone who has just watched a pattern complete itself with such precision that there is nothing left to interpret or soften or explain away. 6 years of not real money, and one Thursday afternoon when it was real enough to route through my parents and arrive at my phone by 4:47 p.m. 6 years of your little projects, and one Thursday morning when the projects were real enough for my brother to call me before the hardware store opened. I sat at my desk for 13 minutes. I was not angry. I want to be precise about that because anger would have been a simpler emotion, and what I felt was not simple. It was the specific, structural clarity of a person who has finally seen the complete shape of something they have been standing too close to for a long time. Not a sudden revelation. More like the moment when you step back far enough from a painting that the individual brushstrokes resolve into an image you can finally read whole. The work was real. It had always been real. The only question that had ever been the question, was whether I was going to keep performing the opposite for the comfort of people who found that performance convenient. I opened my laptop at 6:44 p.m. I opened my invoicing software. FreshBooks, the same account I have used since 2021, the same interface I used that very morning to review the outstanding payment from the Austin FinTech client. I created a new client record. I paused for a moment before I named it. Then I typed Hensley Family Internal. I sat with the cursor blinking in the line item field, and I thought carefully about rates. Not maximum rates. I was not trying to extract value or make a point through a number designed to shock. I was trying to put an accurate number on work that had never had one, because things without numbers are easy to call not real, and I was done with things being called not real. I looked up my 2019 rate sheet. I looked up what I had charged comparable clients in 2021. I applied modest, defensible figures below current market, above zero, which was what I had charged before. I itemized Hensley Property Services, website design, development, copywriting, local SEO foundation, CMS training session, June 2019, $3,400. Hensley Climate Solutions, complete brand identity system including logo design, color and typography system, van decal layout files, invoice template, business card design, service flyer in 2 versions, style guide PDF, October 2021, for $1,600. Hensley Ceramics Etsy shop, product listing rewrite for 23 items, shop design and banner, photography direction document, February 2022, $1,800. Oregon LLC annual report filing, state fee, March 2022, $100. Oregon LLC annual report filing, state fee, February 2023, $100. I looked at the total for a long time. $10,000. I looked at the number the way I look at a design before I send it to a client, checking for errors, checking for honesty, checking whether it said what I meant it to say. It said what I meant. The brand identity alone at current rates should have been closer to $5,500. The website should have been $4,200. I was not billing at current rates. I was billing at the rates of a younger designer who had not yet fully understood the value of her own time, because that was who had done the work, and it seemed right to honor that. In the notes field at the bottom I wrote, "Payment due upon receipt." I am happy to discuss a payment plan if that is helpful. I hope the business stabilizes quickly. I read it twice. I changed nothing. I sent the invoice to Marcus at 7:09 p.m. I copied my parents. Then I closed my laptop and made dinner. I made pasta with a jar of sauce I had been meaning to use since Tuesday, and I ate it standing at the kitchen counter for a moment before carrying the bowl to the table. I sat with the pasta and the rain that had started outside and the orange lines the streetlights made on the wet pavement below my window and the sound of my downstairs neighbor playing guitar, slow, slightly off-tempo, the sound of someone learning a chord progression in a patient, private way. I did not check my phone. I finished the pasta. I washed the bowl. I read for an hour. I went to bed. Marcus did not reply to the invoice. I found this out at 11:52 p.m. when I checked before going to sleep. Not a reply to me, but a forward. He had forwarded the invoice to my parents at 9:14 p.m. with a message I was not shown. I did not need to be shown it. I could read its content in what happened the next morning. My mother called at 8:14 a.m. Her voice had the careful, controlled quality of someone who has been awake since earlier than they are admitting and has had time to decide how they're going to handle the call. She said she had seen the invoice. She said she wasn't sure what I was trying to accomplish. She said Marcus had 2 employees who needed to be paid on Friday and that this was not the moment for whatever point I was attempting to make. She said the word point twice in 2 minutes, which told me that this was the frame that had been settled on in the hours between 9:14 p.m. and 8:14 a.m., that the invoice was a point, a gesture, a piece of theater performed by a daughter who had chosen the wrong moment for a personal statement. I let her finish completely before I spoke. I said, "Mom, the invoice is for work I did over 4 years. It has nothing to do with Marcus's payroll. They are 2 completely separate things." She said she did not see how I could look at it that way. I said I could look at it that way because it was accurate and because the work was real when I did it, and I think it is real now, and I think it has always been real. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said she thought the family needed to talk about this properly, and that she hoped I would be open to that. I said I was. I said I would come to Medford for a weekend when people were ready to have an honest conversation, rather than the version where I was expected to arrive at a conclusion that had been decided before I walked in the door. She said she would talk to my father. I said that sounded good. We said goodbye carefully, the way you say goodbye to someone when the conversation has not resolved and both of you know it. My father's text arrived at 8:47 a.m. It said, "This is not who we raised you to be." I read it twice. I set the phone face down on my desk next to my coffee, and I looked at the wall in front of me for a moment. The wall where I've pinned a print of a map of the Portland transit system that I bought at a market in 2020 because I liked the colors and the clean geometry of the lines. I looked at the lines for a moment. Then I picked up the phone again, and I reread the text, slowly this time, with the particular attention I give to things I want to understand accurately. This is not who we raised you to be. I thought about the website in 2019. I thought about my father in the kitchen doorway saying it looked very professional and going back to the living room. I thought about the van in a Grants Pass parking lot with blue lettering catching the afternoon light. I thought about 23 Etsy listings and $4,200 in sales attributed to ceramics finally finding their audience. I thought about 2 LLC filings on 2 different Tuesdays, 2 $100 fees, 2 confirmation emails sent at night after the work of the day was done. I thought about Deborah saying, without being asked, that I was one of the most undercharging professionals she had ever worked with. I thought about what it meant that a client who paid my invoices had seen that more clearly than my family had. I typed, "I think this is exactly who you raised me to be. You raised me to value work. I'm applying that consistently now." I sent it. I put the phone in my desk drawer. I opened the Austin FinTech project, and I worked until noon. Marcus found a bridge loan through a private business lender named Scott Terrell who operated out of Medford, $25,000, terms I do not know precisely, but can estimate. His employees were paid on Friday. The materials supplier was settled. The net, 60 contracts paid out in late March and early April, and Marcus repaid the loan in full by April 11th. I know this because my mother told me on a call in late April in a tone that carried the implication that the crisis had passed, and perhaps I would like to reflect on my role in it. I said I was glad it had worked out. She asked if I was going to cancel the invoice. I said I was not. There was a pause on the line, longer than a breath, shorter than a decision. She said she thought we still needed to have a proper family conversation. I said I agreed. I said I would come to Medford in May if people were ready. She said she would talk to my father. I said that sounded good. We said goodbye the same careful way we had said it in March. The conversation in Medford has not happened yet. The invoice is still open in my software under Hensley Family, internal. It sits there the way honest things sit, without urgency, without drama, requiring no maintenance or explanation. It does not need to be paid to be true. It does not need to be acknowledged to be accurate. It is a document. It records what happened. It will be there whether or not anyone chooses to look at it. I had dinner with my client Deb Rao on the last Friday of April, not a client meeting, just dinner, the kind that happens when a working relationship has been going long enough to become something else. We ate at a small Thai place on NW 23rd that she had been meaning to try. She told me about a new healthcare portal project coming in Q2, a full information architecture overhaul, 8 weeks of work. She asked about my availability. I said I had availability. She sent me the brief on April 3rd. I reviewed it at my kitchen table that evening with a glass of wine, and the rain on the window making the streetlights into orange watercolors on the glass. The scope was $22,400. I accepted the project. I sent the contract at 9:14 p.m. She countersigned by 9:47. I sat at the table after she signed, and I looked at the confirmation email, and I thought about my father's text. This is not who we raised you to be. I thought about the 6 years of small words and Sunday calls and strategic vagueness. I thought about the van and the website and the Etsy listings and the 2 LLC filings and what all of it added up to when you put a number on it and looked at the number honestly. I thought about the invoice sitting open in my software and the particular, quiet satisfaction of a document that tells the truth whether or not anyone reads it. The work was never not real. I was the only one pretending otherwise, and I did it for 6 years because it was easier than the conversation, and the conversation is still coming, and I am ready for it in a way I was not before March 7th. 6 years of not real built something they needed on a Friday. An invoice is not cruelty. It is just memory with a number attached. I did not change. I just stopped pretending the work was free. There is a version of this story in which I am the difficult daughter who chose a personal statement over her brother's employees. I have heard that version. I understand why it exists. It is the version that requires the least examination of everything that came before March 7th, and the least examination is always the most comfortable path. I do not have the energy to argue with it, and I do not need to because the other version, the accurate one, exists in an invoicing system that has been running since 2021, in a folder of client files organized by year, in a savings account that grew to its current size through 6 years of work that someone in my family called not real money right up until it was the only money they could think of. If you were in my place, after 6 years of free work and one emergency demand, would you have sent the invoice, or let it go one more time? This channel shares real stories about family, boundaries, and the quiet decisions that change everything. The names and some identifying details in this story have been changed to protect privacy.